every small business owner that I know who's been successful, they grow by a step function. Let me show you what I'm talking about. This was a graph that I put together, and I blacked out the actual names of the contracts because it's, I'm no longer in the company and I didn't want to get into a weird area with me giving proprietary information out. So this was something that a slide that I put together when I was being courted, for an acquisition. So we were about the $23 million, range right here when I gave this pitch. So let's just see how we grew. My first company grew. We won on my very first prime contract. That was the big one. That was the $15 million one, but it took a little while to ramp up. So it's, the revenue didn't just happen just like that. It felt like it, but it, really didn't. It took a little bit of a ramp up here because I actually won this thing here. And then there was like 2 or 3 weeks where there was nothing. They said, okay, we're going to start awarding it, next month, and all this kind of stuff. And then there was a transition period where, the incumbent had a lot of it. Plus, it was something called an IDIQ. And as soon as the task order rolled off from the incumbent, that's when we took it. So it didn't happen all at once. So this was a massive step right here. But then, being the idiot that I am, you know what I started doing? I after having success using one strategy, I felt like, oh well, I can't replicate that. Let me start looking at some of these smaller ones. So then I started diverting back to this crazy stuff, like bidding on smaller stuff. Like I said, I'm not that bright, so I was doing that. And so I won a few of these little ones, and some of these were subcontracts. And the subcontracts, they were like gimmies. I won't lie to you. A company comes up to you and say, hey, hey, you just want this big logistics contracts. We could really use you on our bid team. So I joined their bid team. So it was like low effort, but sometimes you win, some decent money that way, but not much. So then I won a second large one. It's like, oh my gosh. But I still wasn't convinced that, going exclusively after big contracts was the way to go. So what do? I start going after these little ones, and, took some low hanging fruit, some subcontracts, but I was a little bit smarter. And I went after a new market. I wanted to get into healthcare, and I wanted to, the 2 areas I really wanted to get into because they were the hottest markets going for acquisition was the healthcare and the intelligence industries. So I very, specifically focused on those. Well, ends up the next one ended up being the Intel one that I won. So I won a really big Intel contract. And then I realized, like, I'm tired of dicking around with these really small things, because all of these small things combined, they weren't even close to the profitability I was getting off of one single big one.
They siphon off a lot of effort too, I would imagine.
Oh, absolutely. There's fixed and variable costs, associated with writing a proposal. Believe it or not, you have so much fixed costs, whether it's for 30 million or 3 million or 300,000. And then there's some increasing with variability. The bigger it is, the more hard, the more difficult it's going to be, but it's not that much. This could be a $30 million effort. This could be a $3 million effort. So it's not like it's 10 times more effort. In fact, it's probably only 35% more effort. So then I got my act together. I won this big one. I won the next big one and the next big one. And before I ended up selling, I won 2 additional big ones, that was on top of this. So I ended up, it was my strategy. The strategy was, go big or go home. And, I was more competitive with these. I could demonstrate maturity. I had corporate credentials. I had all those different things working for me.